Okay, so, right, recording has started, finally. First of all, this video or this discussion, this talk, is in no way funded by anybody. I do not get any monetary benefits for talking about this topic, nor any sort of favor, reward for engaging in this discussion. And I will be talking from a very genuine and authentic voice to hopefully raise awareness about this topic and present my different, so to speak, outlook on the topic of Olympic Rule 50. And I'm not trying to give a speech here. I'm not trying to persuade people here, but I'm just trying to convey my idea, my perception, specifically on what is happening at the happened at the Tokyo Olympics, and I guess it's a still ongoing thing, where one of its decisions to not post pictures of athletes taking the knee on any of its mainstream social media channels, Facebook, and other main channels included. So we're talking about the Tokyo Olympics and specifically the topic of racial equality. And that is that one decision that I really want to look into, analyze, and present and talk about just in a relaxed way, non-sensitive way, non-discriminatory way, share my opinion on that. So we could see there's a lot of strong sentiment, right, from the Olympics Committee to just not focus on the racial equality side of things, because along its history and for decades already, it has always focused on, the games, Olympian strength, athletes trying to showcase their sports skills, athleticism, and all that. And of course, we're also now seeing that, like up to 70% of the athletes, 3,500 athletes have said they actually don't want to, they really want to uphold Rule 50, which states that no kind of demonstration or political, religious, or racial propaganda is permitted in any Olympic sites, venues, or other areas. And it is understandable because we have the freaking pandemic right now, right? And so people have lost jobs. People have lost a lot of things, some of their loved ones. And there's a lot of other unseen risks now. Health risks, safety risks, and mental health is a big problem now. And racism is on the rise, right? Racial attacks, abuse incidents. So before, even when, like a year ago, when the Tokyo Olympics were supposed to be held in last year, right? And now there has been a lot of shift in the social context, right? And now there's the digitalization as well. So it's not just, people holding the games and showing Olympic strength and sportsmen and competition between countries. It's now a totally different time compared to last year. And even 18 months ago, right, even before the games were due to be held in 2020, people really wanted to stick with the IOC's stance on upholding Rule 50. So that, there's no distraction, we're just focusing on the traditional sense of Olympics equal to sports and sports only. And, it's there's so much pandemic going on that nobody really wants to focus on all that stuff. It's already super distracting, right? We have so many elements to focus on that it's already making it 10 times harder for athletes to even focus on the games itself. So why would you make it harder from the IOC's perspective, right? Why would you make it harder, 10 times harder for athletes who are trying to make this game possible together with the team to pull off the Olympics successfully, right? It doesn't make any sense, right, from their perspective. And that's absolutely understandable and very logical. But then again, we're in a social context that's super different, even from 2020 to now. The pandemic, the racism, rise in Asians being attacked, abuse incidents because of race, the very famous George Floyd incident, which I'm not going to talk about today, but you're more than welcome to look into it. Even the closest incident till the Olympics now, which is a couple of weeks ago, the Euro finals, where an African English athlete was unfairly, right, had to take and suffered a lot of racially charged remarks for losing the finals to Italy. And it's, yes, in sports, there's a lot of statistics have shown there's a lot of minorities still not represented as much as a white individual or a privileged individual. Yes, but and the Olympics definitely doesn't want to talk about it, but it's always been there, and it needs to be at least talked about in some context or to some extent in such a social context now, where there's a rise of racial injustice and incidents of the like going on. But you could still see that there's a lot of reluctance from the IOC, which is the Olympic Organizing Committee, right? So they say, yeah, we'll relax the rules, but there's always a but, new guidelines saying, oh yeah, okay, so now you can take a knee as a gesture, you can perform that gesture before the games, before the introductions, but not on medal podiums. And then yes, another new guideline, yes, you can take the knee or raise a fist, gesture, as long as it doesn't target specific people, countries, and that it's not disruptive. And yet, right, yes, there's another thing that happened, which is the governing bodies under the committee, I guess, or working together in collaboration with the Olympics Organizing Committee, that gestures on pool decks, swimming for swimmers in a swimming group on pool decks are still not allowed. So you could see that the Olympics is still very much focused on just games. Let's just focus on games and not talk about racial equality, racial injustice. It's just not. And I really would just, like I said just now, really focus on that one decision not to post on any mainstream social media channels, which looks a little bit odd and rather counterintuitive, right? Why wouldn't anybody want to talk about this topic, right? Why wouldn't anybody include this looming topic, this elephant in the room topic that is like almost inevitable to talk, like ignore right now, right? So but it's a specific decision not to post such gestures on mainstream channels. If it did, it would have made a lot of impact, right, on social media platforms such as Impact. It would. Can you imagine how much it would reach right? Because it has a lot of funding and also many followers and many people viewing it through their channels from their homes this year, especially in a stay-at-home era. So why wouldn't they, right? And I'd really like to make three main points about why they didn't. And it may sound rather counterintuitive, as if they're not supporting racial equality, but in my perspective, I think it's rather, a move that is encouraging us to think outside of the popular opinion of just digitalizing and how absorbed we are by, and just to by digitalizing everything, and the importance of also like sitting back and looking at from the outside bird's eye view, right? What have we become? What is this? What is this approach about? Not just their decision as the Olympics, but now that it's starting to affect every one of us, because everyone is part of the digital community, one way or another. So, in my opinion, it's actually their decision not to post on mainstream social media channels is rather a move to help us think. And I think it's a more silent and rather powerful and humble way to pay respect towards racial equality, not in the normal sense today, which is digitalizing and raising awareness, but also for the community that is not necessarily online. So, and are anonymous, and those who could be and are actually are activists and have dedicated their lives towards a cause, and may have also in that journey fallen victim to a lot of racially charged attacks as a result. Okay, so the first concept that I'd like to talk about is the concept of digital saturation, right? So we've come to a point, right, since the early 2000s to now, we've become super digitalized. Like everything, raising awareness, liking a post, it's become part of our lives every day. Everybody's like taking a selfie. What's the next new thing? What is the new type of clothes we'll wear? What sports are we playing? What are we doing every day? Like everything is super uploaded online to the point that like if somebody's not uploading something, there's probably something wrong with us. Like, can you imagine how absorbed we are with this new reality of digital platforms, like, and being part of it as a user, as a customer, as a business owner or activist or politician or what have you. And it's super like, and this whole digital concept, is further pushed towards to be more prone to using the cyber platforms as a result of pandemic. So yes, there's mental health problems, racism on the rise, a lot of other things, joblessness, economy going down. All these things are negative byproducts of the pandemic. And one of the byproducts, which is positive and negative, is going digital more and more, right? There is also a con to it, and that is it could lead us to start thinking falsely, maybe, or lead us to the misconception that not posting something means we don't support something, right? Just because you don't post something about racial equality doesn't mean you do not support or do not respect it, And like, and that's what I specifically wanted to say, right? Super absorbed with the highlight reel of the online community that, you know, we start shaping ourselves. The perceptions that we're pretty much shaped towards is, you know, everything has to be online. Everything we see judging is online. That we almost forget the 90% of the iceberg, which is where actually the problem lies. And actually, the cause of, if we're talking about racial equality, the cause of racial injustice, the cause of racism attacks, racial abuse, racial remarks actually stem mostly 90% from offline communities. And also, likewise, progress towards change, you know, the journey for a better and racially equal, non-discriminatory world is brought by these change makers and activists who may not be even known to us on the online platform, are actually offline, and yet bring about real progress towards change for a better world for us, towards this cause as well. So, like, it is important for social media platforms, right? So the point being, it is important for social media platforms to post pictures of athletes taking a knee. Yes, but we also have to, I think it's take to not post it, right? Even it was a couple of hours, etc. It's a very silent statement, a powerful statement. I think that also makes us think that we need to also give voice to the unspoken element that I talked about, because the element about like how many lives, how much contributions that have gone unrecognized and yet are consistently contributing towards the cause of racial equality, how many valuable lives are put at risk, how much lifelong commitments these individuals have to make so that another person that looks like them doesn't have to suffer these kind of injustice. The trauma they had to suffer throughout this journey when they're fighting for a cause. And all these things are not talked about online, you know, and I feel like the IOC's decision to not post it is also a rather silent way of making us think, what about the 90% of things that are driving economies, that are driving these racial injustices? What about that world? What about that element? You know, and mind you, like racial equality and all this journey towards racial equality, the fruits and benefits of becoming more equal society as a whole, these cannot be realized within 1 second, 1 day, 10 years, or even 100 years. Like if you look at America as an example, right? The civil rights movement and everything over 100 years ago, or 200 years. And African Americans had to sacrifice so much of their lives, and there are so many activists still today who are trying to talk about this topic, moving across. And you know what? They may not be the person you know on digital media. They may not be the person you see on digital media. They may not even have access to technology on social media. They may not even have followers to talk about this issue on social media. And yet they're contributing towards this cause, like progressively, on a daily basis, consistently, through their actions, offline. And you may not even know that person's name. And yes, they're the ones who are subjected to racial abuse and unfair treatment. So my point being is that, yes, you can talk about these things and raise awareness about these topics online, but this one click, one selfie about like racial awareness is in no way replaceable or substitutable for what victims and activists have to go through so that we are equal in terms of race, treated equally in terms of race in our future, not just in our personal lives in person, but also professionally, so that the next person you hire is not subject to discrimination when they're being hired. And that's just one example of this. And the pandemic has exacerbated this problem to the point that, and all these racially charged hate crimes are not even online. A lot of them are happening online. We don't even know about it. What if the person never covered about it or never had the courage to speak about it? And even if they had the courage to speak about it, what if that, if they speak about it, they'll be violently suppressed, unfairly suppressed for talking about such a topic that's actually anonymously giving us rights so that we're treated more equally as minorities and Asian people. And if you think about it, like social media representation, right? A very small percentage of Asians are still represented on social media or media, right? And a lot of it is not even talked about, like discussed from the perspective of the victims or people who have to put up with these kind of racial remarks that they don't have to in the first place, but had to. And it's not these people who are even talking about it. It's the people who create stories that want to just impose these opinions on us that we don't want to talk. That's absolutely 100% different from what actually happened or the victims had to suffer. So that's also another reason why we need to look at 90% behind the scenes that happens unfairly. Then brings to my next point, the second point, which is the double standard, right? We can't be just lip servicing how we support racial equality and how we are against racism in front and then offending behind. That's absolutely offending behind and be ourselves the real perpetrators and offenders of racism through our actions. And we cannot, and I feel like to be a non-racist and to be anti-racist ourselves, we have to be like that, personally, in person, offline, online, to be authentically non-racist. Whether that means talking to a person politely and being non-racist, or hiring that next person or talking to that someone at work in a non-discriminatory way. We cannot be supporting anti-racial gestures superficially online while ignoring all the unseen elements that are accountable for 90% of the journey that are happening every day, that really drive, that are responsible for racial injustice, which is why these forms of movements happen. And we cannot be double standards just in favor of one group or one individual, one people while severely suppressing and racially attacking another for their advantage, whether that's monetary reasons, power, selfish interests, because that is the most disgusting form of double standards. And honestly, there's no point in supporting racial equality, and there's no point in fighting racism, fighting discrimination in any way, if you're doing the double standard way of supporting racial equality. That is the most toxic and unethical means of fighting racism. Now I want to talk about the third point, which is the final point. So everybody thinks about first show thing, but I feel like people who may think that not posting on the IOC's decision, the Olympics Committee, to not post these topics, these, gestures, in this case, the taking a knee gesture, on its mainstream media. People might think, what? Like, it's not supporting racism. But that actually just shows, in my opinion, from another outlook, that could be a misinterpretation, because after all, we're looking at Japan, and there's so much cultural misinterpretation that could go on. But from my interpretation, right, these things, I think the IOC has made this decision so that people are not just focusing on things for show. And based on what I look at, which is like from a traditional Japanese perspective, if I understand it correctly or interpret it correctly, that not everything is for show, right? Digitalizing and talking about celebrating, championing racial equality online, and focusing only on that might raise a lot of awareness, but what about the unspoken elements? The double standards of it. I feel like this move is actually a call for a return to, or call for humanity, people to really look at another perspective, right? Because doing double standards and just raising awareness online is actually, and fighting racial injustice online, while ignoring 90% of the iceberg, which actually drives systematic racial injustice, is a severe betrayal of ethical values of respect, and it's very disrespectful to those who came before us, those victims, those people who fought for these things, and went through unimaginable pain, trauma, and risks, so that another person who looks like them don't have to be suppressed like they were. I think it's rather a request and a humble and effective means of making a voice, that we really need to start looking at the physical elements, the root of the problems, rather than the tip of the iceberg. The root of racist incidents, the root of hate speech, right, that have risen due to many things, right, dissatisfaction that comes from job loss, etc., venting out, scapegoating each other, when actually the virus doesn't know any race. That we need to focus on the non-digital part. How are we behaving as humans in person? How are we acting every day in our everyday lives towards others? Whether that's in personal life, work life, the importance of having ethical character. And not just respecting each other for the sake of face value or digital superficiality, but also giving, also in person, and being mindful, and giving the importance of giving voice and recognition to the immense unspoken incidents that may not have a like button or a voice, just like the privilege does, but are actually major change drivers that progressively contribute towards the cause. So, from what I interpret, like if speaking about racial inequality and supporting fairness and diversity and ethnicity in lip service just online and raising awareness about it, without having to go through it in real life, which is 90% of the iceberg, if that is interpreted as peace and fighting racism, then that, without taking into account all that stuff, the journey, the trauma, the risks, the people who went through it, who fought for it, the anonymous people, the 110,000 people who fought for it, then and those people who you may not know at all, never heard of. That's not peace. That's not diversity. That is not. That's not equality, and that actually is peace in disguise, and is actually, in my opinion, absolutely disgusting. More disgustingly so than not doing anything about racial equality itself. So I think the IOC's decision to not post athletes, post pictures of athletes taking a knee, and being actually reluctant and to relax the Rule 50, while it may seem like, an action done so that the games are held to focus on its reputation of sports and athleticism, is a powerful and silent yet traditional and respectful means to actually acknowledge racial equality and victims of the cause that may not always, whose journey that may not always be correctly and accurately depicted online due to the dominant opinion and those who always have a say speaking about it and talking about the story like they do, but never actually went through it. So I'd just like to end with some questions, which is, what happened to the moral values? What happened to the authentic voice that makes us human? Like, are we just going to be following trends for the sake of popularity and talking about talking about these topics just so that we get extra 10,000 likes? Or, are we doing this for the right reasons? Like, are we actually just showing superficially online that we're supportive of racial equality just because we fear of being isolated and fear of not conforming, people saying nasty things at us for not supporting the cause? Like, what is this? Is it all done for simply for our selfish interests or whatever costs of others at the expense of other individuals for money and power and selfish interests? Like, what is this? And really, I know the pandemic has been really bad. It has caused a lot of things. And I hope that people really return to being human values and being humble and respectful, not just for show, but also in many other, low-profile ways, regardless. Yet are the hardest workers towards a cause. And I really hope that they're being treated equally and nicely, regardless of our race. Like, the race, the color of their skin, their position of power, and not just lip servicing on social media or by liking a post. Because you cannot be non-racist or anti-racist. One way and then be racist in another. You cannot be non-racist in front and be a racist 90% of the time behind. It doesn't work that way. And that's something I just like to point out. Again, this is not a speech, but really just me and my authentic voice trying to make an opinion on this topic. And I do have every right to talk about this topic as myself, who has been subject to severely, very much unfair treatment that is not talked about, pretty much hidden for many years. And I'm very surprised why these offenders and perpetrators are never held accountable for anything. But we can talk about that topic of justice another time. But for now, it's this topic. Great. So that's it.